Hi, we're Quaint and Curious Volumes. My name is James. Today is Tuesday, and it is Tag Tuesday on BookTube, where we respond to lists of prompts that our friends send to us. My friend Pat at Book Chat with Pat tagged me for this one, which is the winning title tag. It's a bunch of tags pertaining to interesting titles. Um, so I'm just going to go ahead and, I should also say this was created by Heather Reeves. Good channel. Pat's channel, of course, is also good. One of the best. So here we go. There's 8 tags and an invitation to tag others. So I will get started. Have you ever bought a book because it had a funny title? I have bought this book, That Half-Barbaric Twang by Linn. Uh, the title is funny. The book is not exactly a comedy, but it is a history of the banjo in American popular culture. And just as an example, you can see in this photograph here um, these kind of well dressed men in evening attire, all in a group holding banjos, guitars, mandolins, and perhaps if you don't know the history of the banjo in American popular culture, that may seem a bit odd. That's not the attire you associate with banjos. But this book does a very good job of tracing the kind of course through various social strata and types of music that this instrument, the banjo, has taken. So it goes through the minstrel stage, which I've talked about a few times on here, particularly in relation to the book James by Percival Everett. But on the minstrel stage, then a movement called classical banjo, where the banjo was used to play arrangements of light classical music of the sort that parlor guitars might have been used for. And this is a picture from that era. This would be sort of the late 19th century, early 20th century. This is a college banjo club. I believe it's either Harvard or maybe Brown University. A lot of elite universities had these banjo clubs or mandolin orchestras. These were a thing where you would gather a group of these stringed instruments together and play arrangements, elaborate arrangements of light classical pieces. Fascinating history. It also goes into the development of the tenor banjo or four-string banjo, which is associated with traditional jazz. When you think of like Dixieland, the so-called Dixieland jazz, which I think these days they more often will call it traditional jazz, trad jazz, where it has a banjo as one of the rhythm instruments. There's that. So if you're coming from it, from a contemporary viewpoint where you associate banjo mainly with bluegrass or with old time music, this is a lot of history that you don't know, and it's really well written. I haven't read it for a long time. I'm pretty sure it's still in print. It's from 1994, University of Illinois Press. Linn's That Half-Barbaric Twang. Number 2, have you ever bought a book because it had a shocking title? I talked about this a couple months ago. It was a short horror novel called Man F This House by Brian Asman. And it's a haunted house book. And you can imagine if you'd moved into a house that was haunted and seemed to be trying to kill you, you might at some point say, Man F This House. So yeah, I couldn't resist that title. It was too funny, and the book was not bad. So let's see. Prompt number 3: have you ever bought a book because it had a title that sounded like a line of poetry? I don't think I have, but a lot of books have titles that sound like lines of poetry because a lot of books have titles that are stolen from poems and other classic works of literature. I remember probably about a year ago, before I was on BookTube, but uh, Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads did a pretty cool video where he recited a poem he wrote, where all of the lines, I don't think every word of it, but most of the lines included a title of a well-known book. And as he uh, read this poem, the titles of the books would be flashed on screen because Greg knows how to edit videos. And I put a comment in there and I asked him because a couple of those titles were taken from, actual poems. I said, if you wanted to make it really hard, you could only use book titles that were already from well-known poems. And he said that would be a bit too hard. I agree. But I'll put a link to Greg's video if I can find it. I'll put it in the comments. You should definitely check it out. But yeah, so many titles are already from poems. I was at one point trying to see if I could make a list of books that were all based on different lines from Yeats's poem, The Second Coming, because I think it's possible that one poem has inspired more uh, book titles than maybe any other. Certainly, Things Fall Apart and Slouching Towards Bethlehem, but I mean, there's probably half a dozen thrillers and mysteries and war novels and adventure novels called Blood Dim Tide. I'd bet money on it. Or Ceremony of Innocence. All of those have got to be used for titles. So, um, yeah, I don't have a book that I bought just because the title sounded like poetry. Um, Next prompt. Uh, have you ever bought a book because it had a title which made me ask a question? So, um, this is going to be another banjo book. So I'm going to do a handful of music books today. This is a book called African Banjo Echoes in Appalachia by Cecelia Conway. It's from 1994. It's University of Tennessee Press, so another academic book. But this was one of the first books that looked at, well, both before the things that Karen Linn was writing about here, so kind of that pre-popular history of the banjo, and also how we could still hear that in the music as it was performed in well, not today, but when Cecelia Conway was doing her research. So that would have been, I think, like the 1970s, 1980s, early 90s. And this book, if you're interested in the history of the banjo, this is really probably the most important one. Okay, maybe there are some others, but this one is really one of the handful that are really foundational. And she combines this kind of almost archaeological, organological study of the banjo and how it was developed and recreated in the New World based on instruments remembered by slaves from their pre-enslavement life in Africa. So at the time, this was a pretty new research. Now it's sort of a commonplace among people who like banjo music to observe that the banjo is an African instrument or is based on African instruments, which is probably more accurate. But before this book and the research in this book from Conway and others who worked on in the same area, it was common to say that the banjo was the first American instrument, or that it was invented by an American. And sometimes they said there was a man named Joel Walker Sweeney, who was a minstrel performer, a blackface minstrel performer, who claimed to have invented the banjo, even though he did not. But anyway, so she looked at that prehistory and also the black banjo players that she could find still working in Virginia and North Carolina. She went and she found the banjo players and fiddle players and recorded them to see how their music, how their performance practice reflected this history and some of the heritage from Africa. This made me ask questions because when I heard of it, I was like, how is that even possible? Again, this is in the 90s. A lot of this stuff was not known. So how are we hearing in Appalachia echoes of anything from Africa? This book will tell you. Also, there are like 2 volumes of CDs produced that go. Didn't come with this book at the time, but that came out on the Smithsonian Folkways that are fantastic. They're field recordings, so they're rough. If you're expecting Rhiannon Giddens LP, it's not that. It's recordings of very old people playing in their living rooms or backyards. But it's phenomenal, and it's straight from the heart. So great book. Another prompt. Next prompt. Have you ever bought a book because its title, because it had a heartwarming or homely or maybe homey title? I remember seeing the title of Ruth Reichel's, I think it was her second memoir, called Comfort Me with Apples. And that just seemed so so kind of cozy and enveloping. Of course, it comes from the Song of Solomon. And the Song of Solomon 2, verse 5, and the King James translation, stay me with flagons, comfort me with apples, for I am sick of love. Sick of meaning more sick from, sick or overcome by too much or something like that. So, Song of Solomon, of course, is an extended metaphor of God's love for his creation, but as the narrator's love for a beautiful woman. And that phrase, comfort me with apples, is just so so beautiful and odd, but and great for that book, which is Ruth Reichel was a famous magazine editor, a food writer, a restaurant critic, and it's a book about her early marriage and their attempt to start her attempt to start a family with her husband, and the various challenges and setbacks and trials involved in that. And Ruth Reichel is just a very engaging writer. It's like having a conversation with her. I think I read her first 3 books. Haven't read any of the recent ones, but her early memoirs, they're all good. Have you ever bought a book because it had a title with an unusual combination of words? Well, what's more unusual than Psychotic Reactions in Carburetor Dung by Lester Bangs? So Lester Bangs was a famous, famous for someone who did this. He was a rock and roll critic, a rock writer in the 60s and 70s. And just had a really wild writing style. Had all kinds of issues with drugs and psychological problems. Died way too young, but could really turn a phrase and could just write a fantastic title. Psychotic Reactions and Carburetor Dung, a reference to the song by the Count Five, Psychotic Reaction. Amazing. So I'm gonna have to do another video to talk about Psychotic Reactions and Carburetor Dung. He has a whole section about of essays about Lou Reed, untitled notes on Lou Reed. Let us now praise famous death dwarves, or how I slugged it out with Lou Reed and stayed awake. So a lot of wild purple overwriting. And a bad influence on all the rock critics who read him and tried to emulate him. But it's just fantastic. If you've seen the movie from like 20 years ago called Almost Famous, the character he's played by Philip Seymour Hoffman in that movie. So the guy who tells the young protagonist, "You can call me whenever you want. I'm always up. I'm always home because I'm uncool." So that's Lester Bangs. All right. Have you ever bought a book because it has a magical or fantastic title? Well, here's another music book. It is The 100,000 Fools of God. Musical Travels in Central Asia and Queens, New York by Ted Levin. So this is, what a fantastic title, 100,000 Fools of God. This is kind of a travelogue, an ethnomusicological travelogue. I think Levin might resist the title ethnomusicologist, although it was assigned to me in an ethnomusicology class. But he goes around, the Central Asian republics. I think it was still in the Soviet days. So some of the survivals of these pre-modern bardic traditions, things that went back centuries and still were being performed. Just fantastic. Hi. Had to pause for a moment there. I have one last prompt, which is: have you ever bought a book because it had a title which is a contradiction or describes the impossible? I didn't buy this book. I never bought this book. I don't know. No, I don't think I've ever owned a copy, but I did take it out of the college library and read it. It is "Cigarettes Are Sublime" by Richard Klein. This is a 1994 title as well. So we're doing a lot of mid-90s stuff today. This came out and was reviewed in I guess the only things I was really reading regularly then were like the Village Voice book reviews and the New York Press. The New York Press probably covered this book because it's their kind of oddballs, pseudo-intellectual contrarian sort of a kind of a title. Anyway, it was written by a philosopher while as a way of helping him come to terms with quitting smoking. Cigarettes are sublime. So he used the concept of the sublime, which, if I remember right, came from Kant, one of those fancy European people. And it went through all kinds of history about smoking in general and about cigarettes and the kind of poetic beauty of this act that feels good but also feels bad and makes you feel more thoughtful and alert but also is shortening your life, the whole kind of contradictory thing. Very clever book. I hope it helped Richard Klein quit smoking. It's probably responsible for me quitting smoking, a couple of years later than I should have. So thank you very much, Richard Klein. Anyway, it's all right. I'm over it. But yeah, that's a pretty impossible contradiction. He makes a good case for it. Don't smoke, kids. Bad habit. Okay. So the last prompt, number 9, is tag others. So I'll tag anyone who's watching this and wants to do it. I'll specifically call out a new channel that I discovered this week. Philip Hall. He's a poet. I think he's Australian. Just got started. Has some good videos. Check him out. He's got a beautiful beard. And let's see who else. Speaking of beautiful beards, I want to tag Randy Ray, who's been away for a bit, but I hope he's coming back soon. So Randy Ray, the Literate Texan. Let's also tag Big Hard Books and Classics. So we have some unbearded people also reading ideas who doesn't even seem to have hair on top of his head. Let's tag Strange Mentality Paper, who does have hair on top of her head, and it's magnificent. So there you go. That's who I'm tagging. I'll also tag the left-handed reader because she's got a great channel, and I would like to hear her titles, answers to these. Although she doesn't seem to buy many books, she's more of a library person, which is also cool. I mean, yeah. So that's what I have. Thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later.